Hello everyone, in this video I am going to teach you about Saturn in 7th house of D9 chart or Navamsa chart in Vedic astrology. So before beginning, if you are not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon and click the like button. And if you have any doubt after watching this video, please do mention it in my below comment section, okay? And yes, please like and follow my Facebook community page Parikshith Astrology, where you can also post some astrological stuff and gain knowledge. So let's begin. So mainly, what do you mean by Navamsa chart of the D9 chart? See, Navamsa chart of the D9 chart is the second most important chart of your birth chart. It mainly gets activated after your second half of your life, that is after your married life or after 33 years or 36 years of your age. It is mainly seen for your strengthness of your planet. It is also seen for your married life. It is also seen for your relationship between you and your spouse and also your marital life. Now coming to the strengths of your planet. Now let's say for example if any planet is debilitated in your birth chart. Now let's say for example if Sun is debilitated in your birth chart and that planet Sun is been exalted in your Navamsa chart or the D9 chart, that shows that that planet Sun has gained extra strength or extra power. Now coming to the married life. See, every individual divisional chart including the main birth chart has its own Karaka planet or the significator planet, right? So, for example, in your birth chart, Sun is the Karaka planet or the significator planet, right? Likewise, in your Navamsa chart or the D9 chart, Venus is the Karaka planet or the significator planet. So, Venus should be placed in an exalted sign, Multrikon sign, own sign or in a friendly sign. That shows that your married life will be very good. Now, coming to the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart. Now, what does 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart represents? See, 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart represents your spouse appearance, characteristics of your spouse. It also represents your married life, how it will be. It also represents your relationship between you and your spouse. So, these are all things can be seen through the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart. Now, what happens when Saturn is sitting in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart? Now, what does planet Saturn represents? It represents hard working, it represents long term, it also represents struggles, it also represents your actually problems that you need to face in that particular areas of life. It also represents longevity, it also represents old looking people. Now it also represents laziness. Now when Saturn is sitting in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it shows that after your married life you might face some relationship problems. You might get a spouse who might be looking very old or who might be very older than your age. It also shows that you might face some partnership issues in business, or it might be in any terms of partnerships. You might face some issues. It also shows that you will get very good reputation through your married life and you will get very huge respect and honor from your marriage, or even your spouse might also get that respect or honor. And it also shows that after your married life you need to be very careful with your enemies. So 7th house also represent enemies, so even 6th house represent enemies, fighting with your enemies, competition with your enemies. 7th house represents actual enemies, so you need to be very careful here. But it also shows that struggles and hard work, so you need to work hard in order to get success in any matters related to business or any partnerships. Now, what happens when Saturn is conjuncted with different planets like benefic planets and malefic planets? Now, coming to the benefic planets. Now, what happens when Saturn is conjuncted with benefic planets like Moon, Mercury, Venus and Jupiter? Now, coming to the planet Moon. Now, what happens when planet Saturn is conjuncted with planet Moon? Now, what does planet Moon represents? It represents mother. It signifies happiness. It also represents your emotions, your mind. So when Saturn and Moon are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it shows that your spouse might be practical, your spouse might be like cheating type of personality. It also shows that your mother's health might get affected. It also shows that after your married life you might be interested towards alcohol stuff and all, or cigars, smoking and all. And it also shows that in order to get happiness you need to work hard. Now, what happens when Saturn is conjuncted with planet Venus? Now, what does Venus represents? It represents your spouse. It represents your actually beauty. It also represents your luxurious life. When Venus and Saturn are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it shows that you might fight with your spouse, after your married life. It also shows that there might be some problems in the married life also. It also shows that your spouse might be very lazy also. It also shows that your spouse might be very cruel sometimes. And you need to be very careful here, your spouse might be matured sometimes. Now, what happens when Saturn is conjuncted with a planet Jupiter? Now, what does planet Jupiter represents? It represents knowledge, it represents your teacher, gurus, it represents your advisors, counselors, it represents your finance. Now, when Saturn and Jupiter are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it shows that your spouse might be selfish. It also shows that your spouse might be older in age and matured enough, and it also shows that your spouse might be having very great knowledge upon particular subject. It also shows that you need to be very careful during Saturn's dasa or Jupiter's dasa, because you might fight because of your priorities. Now, what happens when Saturn is conjuncted with planet Mercury? Now, what does planet Mercury represent? It represents your communication, it represents your logical ability, it also represents business. Now, when Saturn and Mercury are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it shows that after your married life, you might face some issues regarding your business. If it is placed very well, if Saturn and Mercury are placed very well, then nothing to worry, you will rise in your business. But if it is afflicted or if it is placed very badly, then you need to face some problems in your business, or some losses also might be there. Now, what happens when Saturn is conjuncted with malefic planets like Sun, Mars, Rahu and Ketu? Now, coming to planet Sun. Now, what happens when Saturn is conjuncted with planet Sun? Now, what does planet Sun represent? It represents king, government. It also represents ego. So, when Saturn and Sun are conjuncted in the 7th house of D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it represents surely you will have divorce. It represents surely you will have a divorce through your ego or through dominative nature, and it also shows that you might get some loss from government or from government officials. Now, what happens when Saturn is conjuncted with planet Mars? Now, what does planet Mars represent? It represents aggressiveness. It also represents courage. So, when Saturn and Mars are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it shows that you might fight with your spouse after your married life through aggressive nature or being angry. It also shows that it might end up with divorce. So, malefic planets in the 7th house might make the person to get divorced. It also shows that you will constantly fight with your spouse. You might be short tempered also. Or it also shows that your spouse might be aggressive type of personality or might be having short tempered nature. Now, what happens when Saturn is conjuncted with planet Rahu? Now, what does planet Rahu represents? It represents illusion, Maya. So, when Saturn and Rahu are conjuncted in the 7th house, that shows that there might be some disturbance in your marriages that you need to face, and it also shows that there might be some problems occurring after your married life. It also shows that you might marry someone who is out of your community or other religion. So, these are all the things can be seen through when Saturn and Rahu are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart. Now, what happens when Saturn is conjuncted with planet Ketu? Now, what does planet Ketu represents? It represents separation, divorce. It represents spiritual planet. It represents occult science. When Saturn and Ketu are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart, the same thing happens as a malefic planets. It makes the person to live apart from each other. It also shows that you might be living far away from your spouse, or even though if you are living with your spouse, you might not be able to communicate with your spouse that much. It also shows that there might be some kind of misunderstandings in your marriage or after your marriage, or it might be misunderstanding in your relationships and all. So, these are all the things can be seen through when Saturn is sitting in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart in Vedic astrology. So, this is it for today guys. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe below, or else I will see you in the next video. So, if you want any consultancy, please do contact to my given below WhatsApp number, or else you can even mail me also. So, until and unless, thank you, bye bye, love you, take care.